Keisha, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm trying to find, did you guys send out the agenda for this meeting? I was trying to find it from Colin.
Keisha, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I thought I had an echo.
Not on my end. It sounds pretty good here.
Okay, I'm at home today. So trying to get on early to make sure everything's gonna work. But I may need to switch to my headphones. So maybe I need to test those now before folks start coming in. All right, give me a few minutes.
We are at quorum, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I just need like just a few seconds to see if I can put this earpiece up. Took me longer than I thought to find it. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. I am going to officially call our meeting to order at 10:31 a.m. We are at quorum. I thank everybody for their promptness this morning.
You may want to speak up just a little bit, Sharita.
You can't hear me?
That's better. It was just very soft.
Is that better? Is that better?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
The first item on our agenda are the approval of our minutes. I will entertain corrections and a motion to approve those minutes if we see fit.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
So I have a motion by Helen. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Drew. All those in favor? Yes in the chat. The voting members, please. If that motion carries, we have our minutes approved. The next item on our agenda is the unsheltered numbers update. Colin or Nicole?
I've got them. Thank you to Nicole. So as of this last week, 40 unsheltered families, 105 unsheltered singles. This is all by self-report. 12 families reporting they're at risk of homelessness in 14 days, 27 singles at risk of homelessness in 14 days. It's a total of 184 households, 322 individuals. Last week, one family went to shelter, 3 females went to shelter, and 22 men went to shelter. There were 5 clients who exited shelter and called to get back in, 1 from rescue mission, 6 from other counties, 1 from another country. None called about that weren't an appropriate fit, and nobody was calling on behalf of DHA evictions. So I'll put it in the chat for you.
Does anybody have any questions?
I'll be meet till noon. So come on in.
All right, you're muted, right?
Yep.
So I do have 2 questions. Is Nicole on?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, good. Because one of the questions you might be able to answer. My first question is about the one family that moved in. Is it safe to say that we're seeing movement on properties opening up, and so one family at least exited to a permanent positive destination?
The
Do we
one
know?
family that went to shelter last week.
Right,
That
but
was
in
the
order
one
for that
family.
right, but in order for that one person to go into shelter, something needed to open. So do we know what happened to the family that was
Oh, yes,
was
they were
in the shelter?
housed. From family moving forward, they were housed.
Okay. Do we know if they were housed in one of the Forever Home Bond Properties.
I know it was rapid rehousing.
Okay. But that's great news. I just need to celebrate that because we haven't did
Yes,
this meeting with
yes,
families in a very long time. So for me, I
yes.
was very happy to see that.
And I was told from family moving forward, there's 2 other families that they're working on getting housed. So I'm hoping in the next week or 2 we'll have 2 more family rooms opening.
I think this is great news, folks. My second question with those numbers was, and I don't know if this is your answer, Nicole, or maybe Colin, or if there's another staff person on, maybe they can answer it. So I see, we have been tracking the people who've left and called back in for a bed. Do we have any ideas of the needs of those people? Like, who are some of those people the same people every single time, and what the needs are for those people?
That'd be a Nicole question.
I do know some of the exits from the shelter. Clients are self-reporting to the shelter, Urban Ministries, just saying they don't want services and they are leaving to go stay with friends temporarily. That's what I'm seeing. Some are just no exit interviewed because they have left the shelter, didn't come back for curfew. So I'm seeing that, and there was 2 that got housed with rapid housing one-time assistance from the shelter.
Okay. Thank you. Is anybody from UMD on?
No,
Do we have a chance to talk to somebody, Colin?
I have not, but they always know about the meetings. I'll send an email right now.
It would just be great if other people have questions about like some, especially around these numbers, and the numbers at the bottom that we've been intentionally tracking about people coming in and out, trying to figure out how we need to um address those needs, or is there a different intervention that might be more appropriate to help them because they're coming back to shelter. So I would just be curious about that. All right, we're going to move to our next item on our agenda, which is our tent policy next steps. So from the last draft review meeting, I had to step away because I actually had a client emergency in the clinic. But my understanding from Colin was that the group decision was that additional concerns, questions, information, feedback would be provided to Dr. Battle by Wednesday of last week. Dr. Battle would then evaluate, review those comments, make changes where she felt changes needed to be made. And then we would convene, Colin, myself, would convene with Dr. Battle to determine the next steps on the timeline. We still really do want to get this policy out this month. I feel like any further hindering us having some kind of plan puts folks that are outside right now in tents being asked to move in a very, very difficult position. And I think the urgency in which we started this process was to be responsive in real time. And I feel like the more we continue to put that off, we kind of miss that mark. While I do know that the policy, in all aspects, people had concerns about some of the things. I think at least phase 1 of what a tent distribution interim policy would look like needs to be delivered to this body for review and to HSAC in our March meeting. We would be doing folks a disservice if we didn't do that. I don't know if anybody else has any concerns they want to share around that. We did a lot, 10 minutes. And then the plan would be, once that document is refined by Dr. Battle, we would send it out to policy and planning for the electronic vote to forward to HSAC. So we're still hoping. I did speak with Dr. Battle on last week briefly. And based on some of the concerns around, the legalities of some of the things we had in the document, she has made inroads to have one of the law classes at Central to vet the legalities addressed, or the legality concerns that were expressed in our draft review meeting. And we're hoping to get that back in the coming week. Any questions? That was easier than I thought it was going to be. Okay.
Russ had a question in the chat
Oh,
about
I can't
which
see
part.
his name. Go ahead, Russ.
No, my question is just, do we have a sense of what jurisdiction HSAC actually has over some of the recommendations that are currently in because the tent policies kind of seems a little bit like a merger of a tent distribution policy and sanctioned encampment policy, and some other pieces. What's actually in the jurisdiction of the HSAC versus would need to be sent as recommendations to council or commissioners to consider?
So I can sort of help answer a little bit of that. In terms of the tent distribution policy, it is an HSAC adopted policy. If there was a sanctioned encampment that was being I think that was kind of the recommendation. It was tents would be distributed in a sanctioned encampment. If the city or county were going to do that, that would be city and county would have to authorize a sanctioned encampment. However, if a nonprofit entity or private enterprise had private land to do an encampment on, that would be within their rights, as long as it followed city, county planning, zoning, all the code enforcement stuff could be done that way. So in terms of what the HSAC can sort of say, this is the tent policy of the HSAC. And if there's pieces in there that require city council to act or county commissioners to act, then they can choose to act or choose not to act. But we can't force them to act. We can just sort of say this would be the policy of this that the group approved. Does that help, Russ?
Yeah, so what I think I'm hearing is, if a nonprofit wanted to set up a sanctioned encampment on a piece of property, they would be the ones responsible for going to the planning commission or whatever to find out what the zoning and regulations were on that piece of property. Because anything this group approves would then have to be, it's not that the city or county are sorry, my NyQuil hasn't fully worn off. It's not that the city or county are sanctioning that this is necessarily an idea they're supporting. It's that this committee is saying some nonprofits may go do this, and they would be responsible for making sure it was within all the applicable legal guidelines and stuff like that. Hopefully that makes sense.
Essentially, yes. It would be sort of like HSAC is saying, to distribute tents, here is the policy. And if that policy, it was sort of like a best case scenario, you had a sanctioned place where people could camp. That location could either be on public property or private property. And this policy doesn't delineate that it's on public or private property. It's just that if it is in a sanctioned location, then obviously if a private enterprise wanted to do it on privately owned land, then we would obviously, as the homeless team, help to sort of navigate through the city stuff and help get meetings pulled together for that location and help to the greatest extent we could. And while we're doing that, we're also looking at, is there public land that is available to do this on that would be amenable from a zoning land use, permitting, inspections, fire marshal, all the other pieces that would have to go through to use public land. So yes, we're not committing the city or the county to come up with land. It's here's what we'd have to do, and we're talking with the city departments to try and determine whether or not there is land available, because that was a recommendation that HSAC wanted us to do.
And what I would add to that is that however an encampment space becomes available, what we want as a HSAC to make sure that we are providing to the community knowledge, resources, people, people who've stood things like this up before, the things they've ran into, to try to help that process along. Like, instead of us like trying to recreate it all from the start, trying to make sure we supply enough information to folks who are interested, as well as the city and county, to make sure they know what it would take for us to stand something like this up in a way that is humane and safe and proper. So it's like no way to talk about tents and not talk about pallets. So I mean, I think these two things fit together. And so our hope for next month, or our plan for next month, is to actually bring some resources and some folks to the table for policy and planning to help us talk through places who've already done this stuff in our state, to kind of further us in that process, so that we can make sure that our community is informed that if these are steps and actions we want to take, how can we, do it in the most efficient and effective way. Let's see, did I miss any of my notes? Nope. Does anybody have any questions on the tent policy or the update on pallets, tents, parking?
There was a question Ryan asked. No, it has not gone to the city attorney's office, as the draft policy, there was a chance for feedback to come in via email until Wednesday of last week. I'll have to check with Keisha to see if any additional feedback came in before the final edits were made. And then once the final edits are made, we'll send it to the city attorney's office just to get their eyes on it.
Any other questions? All right, the next item on our agenda before we get to the meat of our discussion today is changes to the HMIS data quality plan, and that's going to be presented by Ricky. Ricky, you here?
I am here. I am fumbling around with my stuff. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay. So, greetings. We are at a place in our continuum where we need to reevaluate our HMIS data quality plan. So HMIS is the Homeless Management Information System, and that is the portal that projects in the Durham COC enter their information regarding their care for, case management, interactions with those who are experiencing homelessness in our community. Long story short, Durham has historically initiated a data quality cleanup 3 times a year. Data quality in HMIS is absolutely a labor of love. So think of it kind of like as a trimester. So like trimesterly, Durham would ask projects to review their data, make sure all the information was correct, and then submit corrections or questions to the North Carolina Coalition to End Homelessness, which serves as our HMIS lead agency, if you will, or HMIS provider to say, yes, this is correct, or let's talk about this a little bit. There are, there is rather movement within our state where some COCs are going to a quarterly data quality review and cleanup. And I propose that Durham be on the same wavelength as our sister COCs across the state. So I'm going to share, I'm going to attempt to share my screen is what I'm trying to say. Give me 1 second. And I will show you the proposed new schedule. Can y'all see this?
Nope.
Cool. How
Something's
about
coming.
now?
Yes.
Great, fantastic. So I propose that the Durham COC join the balance of state COCs as well as the Orange County COC, which is moving to this quarterly review of their data quality. So that means that provider agencies in the Durham COC would be submitting their data information to NCCEH 4 times a year, starting this July. So July 31st, 2025, the first report would be due. The second one would come up at the end of October. The third one would be the end of January 2026, and the final one being April 30th of 2026. And this would align us again with what the balance of state is doing, their COC, and Orange County as well. And I think wanting our information to be as clean as possible is going to help make sure that we are, reporting the right things, we're asking for the right things, and we're noticing the right trends. But in order for us to make this change, it does need approval from policy and planning, and then be a recommendation for the HSAC to adopt. And that's the end of my presentation.
Does anybody have any questions?
We do need a vote and a recommendation because this would ultimately change a few things. So we do need to formally adopt a change to quarterly if that's what we feel is a good thing to do. The homeless team, as Ricky said, the homeless team recommendation is we move that way. It makes the work each quarter instead of trimester a lot less. You're not looking at such a big time frame. Ricky, you want to talk about what it would change? It would just change the data quality cleanup would be 4 times a year instead of 3 times a year.
Exactly. So it's just putting one more month in there, and exactly what you said, Colin, instead of being like this lift 3 times a year, hopefully our data would get cleaner over time each time that we, check in every 3 months to do it quarterly. And Balance of State has already approved this. Orange County is approving it next week. My recommendation is that the Durham COC join that same data quality plan review process.
That answer your
So
question, Russ?
logistical-
What is balance of state?
Balance of state. So Durham, Orange County, Wake, a lot of us have direct COCs that submit applications to HUD for continuum of care notice of funding opportunities annually. There are a bunch of other counties that are collectively called the balance of state. There tend to be more rural counties that sort of band together and they submit one collaborative application as balance of state to HUD for funding. So the balance of state is a continuum of care that's made up of multiple counties, whereas we are one continuum of care representing one county.
Okay, thank you. So that includes Mecklenburg and Guilford, those Cumberland, those counties.
Mecklenburg would not be in there, but like Person, Chatham, Granville, Asheville, some of these other smaller counties are sort of banded together. I think there might be, I want to say 70 something counties that are in the balance of state.
I think it's 79.
And there are multiple balances of state too, or there's just one?
Just one in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason I was asking is whether Mecklenburg and Cumberland, some of the other larger counties, they've already adopted this as well, is what you're saying.
Yes, I was trying to unmute myself. We would be, doing what the majority of the state has agreed to start doing. And, we want clean data. Clean data is the best data. And the homeless team this would allow us to look at this 4 times a year, and also help provide more frequent and regular technical assistance to our projects and notice what is trending in our COC.
So my question is, logistically, what would that look like for our agencies that use HMIS? Like, what does that mean? Does that mean some kind of blast email comes out to say this review is happening, make sure you tighten up your data, get stuff in? What logistically? Like, I mean, like for SOAR, we do the same thing for SOAR. They give us deadlines. So I'm just wondering, like, what logistically does that look like? And some of our providers are not on call today. Like, how is that going to impact them? Like, does that make their work more difficult or challenging? Or you get what I'm saying? You get the question?
I sure
I'm
do.
asking?
I sure do.
Okay.
So, having sat in the provider seat for, almost 8 years, what is this asking the provider to do? Instead of, run this report 3 times, you're actually going to do it 4. But hopefully, what we'll see is that your data over time, the quality of it is improving. So you're missing less of those universal data elements. You're making sure that for clients in your long-term projects that you're doing annual assessments on them, that you're, getting updated information, that you're looking at their income regularly. So things that we, want to track so that we know what's happening with the households that we're serving in this community. The income information is the most important because that's telling the biggest story. Like folks who we are assisting, what is their financial situation? So this isn't too much of a heavy lift for projects. It's just asking them to run it one more time. And hopefully the more often it's run, the better it is. Really, it's going to help the homeless team be able to review this, clean it, and offer technical assistance or support back out to agencies to see, what's going on, how can we help, what are you experiencing?
Understood. Anybody else have any questions? Any other questions for Ricky? I just want to be mindful, like when we do things like this, like I want to make sure that we're getting the provider community feedback so that we make sure that we're not approving something that you guys might not feel is feasible for you. Like the only way we know that is if y'all tell us. So I just want to put that out. I want y'all to put that out there because I know I've heard concerns about how we've worked in the recent past, and I just want to get us to a better place with that.
And Sharita, I want to affirm that, but I think one thing that'd be helpful, we really do need to get these agendas out. I mean, this is effectively business night because I'm enough removed, I'll own, that I can't contribute effectively to this without being able to talk to the team and get some feedback. I mean, I think this is fine, but it's just a good example of, I'm assuming there wasn't a decision Friday to put this on the agenda. So if we just know in advance of things where we need to hear from the broader teams, that does help. And I think we've had some good moves in that direction, but just affirming to continue to go that direction.
Understood. My goal is to get the agenda out to you guys a week before. We've had a very unusual beginning of this year that's made it very challenging and difficult with a lot of moving parts. And we're trying to, one, make sure that we're responsive to the things that are real time, while at the same time trying to do the business. So please forgive us. We will strive to do better on next month,
We will.
because I do think it's important for you to be prepared for discussions for the meeting so that work can happen. Any additional questions?
Madam Chair, I just make a comment that I put in the chat to Colleen that I want to clarify too. Colleen, you asked about Mecklenburg and Guilford and other COCs if they were also taking this step. So Durham, Orange, and the balance of state are the COCs that contract with NCCEH to be their HMIS data lead administrator. So all the counties that, excuse me, that NCCEH is working with have made this decision to move to quarterly. The other county or the other COCs, based on data software and who leads them, who has the contract with it, just use a different provider. So that's why we don't have that information to share. I just want to give you everyone that NCCEH is working with has made this decision.
So I'm sorry, this is an item requiring us to vote on it. So what is the will of the committee as far as increasing our data reviews from 3 times to quarterly?
I would move that we take the lead agency's recommendation to adjust our data cleanup from 3 times a year to quarterly for North Carolina Coalition and Homelessness recommendation.
I have a motion. I need a second.
I second Ebony.
Seconded by Ebony. All those in favor, yes, no, abstain in the chat, please. All right. Motion carries. Thank you, Ricky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all.
So we are at 11:03, and the last item on our agenda that we have allotted 55 minutes, but I would just say probably the remainder of the meeting too. And this is the unsheltered coordinated agency discussion. I'm going to give some ground rules for this for us to get through this. So what I would like to do is open first with committee policy and planning committee members' feedback. And then once that happens and that part of the discussion happens, what we would like to do is to move then to gallery insights, concerns, questions at that time. What I would like to see happen is if there are multiple persons from one agency that want to respond, that they pick one representative to kind of give the feedback of the body, so that we can kind of move this along. And then I just also want us to be mindful that because we are HSAC that's comprised of elected officials, but also service providers, we need to be mindful of some of the potential conflicts of interest in this conversation. So those are the ground rules that I am providing for this discussion. I want us to have a really good discussion about this and what we think that how we can inform recommendations to city and county leadership as to the unsheltered coordinated agency. And at this time, I will open the floor.
Madam Chair. Just there are 2 points of clarification
Okay.
that I'd like to share before you get into the conversation, if you may.
Okay.
One, wanted to make sure that people understood that in the HSAC meeting, when Russ from Housing for New Hope stated he was not applying for the UCA contract, he was sharing that as the executive director of Housing for New Hope, not as an HSAC member. His recommendation was coming from him as an executive director, not an HSAC member, to move the contract to, or move the work to the HART team. The other piece is, as of right now, no final decision has been made as to what is happening. The homeless team has been working for the last few months on drafting an RFP, and that RFP includes unsheltered coordinating agency, coordinated entry with diversion, and white flag. So it's not 3 separate RFPs. It's one RFP that includes all of these. And we have sort of continued to work that way and are waiting on final decisions to be made at the city manager level to determine what will happen and whether or not we need to make adjustments to our RFP that is currently in the works. And we don't want to hold that up too long, because we don't want to run out of runway and have a gap in services on coordinated entry with diversion and white flag at the end of June. The other piece is related more to the county. So I will turn it over to Samantha to share how this may affect the ARPA funds.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I hope that's okay. I know,
That's
okay.
fine. Go forward.
So, you know, UCA is separate from the ARPA grant that was awarded in December of last year to Housing for New Hope for homelessness services. And, you know, I just wanted to add some context because we've received at the county several inquiries about it. And I thought just speaking about this would be helpful. So, you know, the county's aware of Housing for New Hope's announcement about the change in their future of street outreach programming. And just wanted to note that at this time, Housing for New Hope does still have an active grant from Durham County under that ARPA Homeless Services RFP. And the organization has not requested to amend or terminate the grant to date. The county is working with Housing for New Hope to learn more about their perspectives and priorities as it relates to the future of this grant. Excuse me. And we're working with them to ensure that these funds are utilized for the intended purposes, as well as in accordance with all applicable requirements dictated by that federal ARPA funding. So we have received several inquiries about how this funding could potentially be reallocated and things like that. I do just want to note that so the county's first priority, as with all the ARPA funding, is to ensure that the ARPA Homeless Services Grant funds are obligated and expended in accordance with all the applicable federal requirements. And the county is unable to take any steps regarding this grant that would be in violation of those federal requirements attached to the funds. As of December 31st, 2024, which was the obligation for ARPA funding, the obligation deadline for ARPA funding, federal requirements prohibit the county from reallocating or repurposing the ARPA funds. Repurposing these ARPA funds to a different purpose than what was underneath the contract. Sorry, I lost my place in the notes that I had prepared for this because I wanted to make sure I'm communicating clearly. So, excuse me. So we want to recognize that the ARPA Homeless Services Grant did not address all of the needs for individuals experiencing homelessness, and that those needs may increase if there are changes to current federal resources provided through other avenues. However, if the grant to Housing for New Hope is unable to move forward under federal requirements, Durham County would either have to reallocate the funds to other ARPA funded programs that were obligated prior to that December 31st, 2024 deadline, or enter into a replacement agreement with another entity for the same services as the contract. We could not recompete this for any homeless services. It would have to be those same services. And because any replacement agreement would require a competitive award process, it would be infeasible to do a full expenditure of these funds by the expenditure deadline. And basically we would be unable to recompete these. So I just wanted to share that information, that we are working on making sure that these can go to to serve our unhoused neighbors, but wanted to share that update from the county.
With that update from the city and the county side, as these are city and county funded projects, the Unsheltered Coordinating Agency, otherwise known as the UCA, is a joint city and county funded project. And it's important to know that it's ultimately the city council, county commissioners, city manager, county manager who have ultimate decision-making authority on where and what happens with these funds in this project. And in order to help guide that, that's where Chair McCollers is asking for some feedback to help provide additional insight, information, and hear from the Policy and Planning Committee. As after this announcement, there were a lot of phone calls and emails that have come to both Samantha and I, and speaking with Madam Chair, it was determined this would be the best place for the group to convene and share thoughts, opinions that could be incorporated into and help guide the decision-making processes to next steps. But with that, Madam Chair, I will defer back to you.
All right, so we've gotten some collateral information to help kind of center us as we move forward in talking about this, and I've given a few ground rules that I would ask that everybody kind of comply with, and I will open the floor for discussion around this. Committee members.
A question, I guess, to start. So,
Yes.
I guess just as like maybe for some clarification, I know this is all like happening. The timeline seems really fast, and I'm just thinking back to Ricky's recommendation as a lead agency. I'm curious, as kind of having the oversight between city county, if the lead agency has any recommendation, because my understanding is currently there's 3 agencies doing the work that falls under the scope of the projects you just listed, Colin, with coordinated entry for diversion, white flag, and the unsheltered coordinating work. So I'm just curious, I'm assuming, a month ago, the RFP was in process. Has anything changed? I guess I'm just curious what the lead agency would recommend moving forward.
Right now, we do not have a formal recommendation. We are continuing with the RFP as it is, as it's written, and we are working to gather information and try and sort through and provide information to the ultimate decision makers. But right now, there is not a final formal decision or recommendation on this at this point. We're hoping to hear from Policy and Planning to help guide a final recommendation.
Okay, so I guess my next question would be then, has anything shifted that would change that RFP process? I mean, that's to the group. I mean, I guess that'd be my question for this body.
Because the RFP includes several pieces, I think it would change, what's in the RFP. Is that correct, Colin? And it would change, depending on how long this took, it would impact deadlines for getting the RFP for those other things out, because changes would have to be made to the RFP document in itself. And these are just from my conversations with Colin, and Colin, feel free to add in. But I think time for getting those other matters, the opening the competition for those other things that are not included under UCA would be impacted if we, if depending on how this goes or what decisions are made. I think one of the things that we've talked about as a policy and planning committee, because so I do have my list, but I don't like to give my list first because I feel like my list influences people, right? So that's why I always kind of try to open it up to everybody else. Not that like what I say is like the standard or whatever, but I want to hear from the body. But I think one of the things that comes up in the forefront of my mind is competition. For the years that I have been doing this work, it always comes up. Like there are other people who want to also serve our population, and may be very good at what they can offer us and help us diversify and do better as a system. I believe unity is so important in this work that we do. Without us being unified and working together to end homelessness, we're not effective. We lose focus and scope, and we also ruin the relationships with the community, with the folks we serve, with the systems that also serve those people. So we have a lot of moving parts and pieces. So I think one of the things that stands out to me is if this happens in this way, then we close the door on competition. We don't get other people who may be very good at being able to do this work. If the UCA just goes to heart, which whatever the body recommends is what we'll do. But I think it hurts like our efforts to try to open the door for other people when we make decisions in this way. So so that's just one of the things that's on my list that I will kind of share in hopes of fostering more conversation. So I would assume from the silence, which I'm supposed to let the silence go longer, but I struggle with that. Are there no concerns? But there are no points of discussion, no positions anybody wants to share.
I mean, I'm happy to speak up. And I was waiting for others to share as well. I mean, I think as someone who also is working with an agency that is currently offering one of these DHF funded contracts that would be renewed during the next fiscal year, I mean, I guess I have some concerns with the timeline and how this is generally following best practice. I feel more comfortable having an open and transparent and collaborative application process than just tapping one organization or department to do that work. I thought that coming through policy and planning was best practice. And so given this timeline, that's why I was, trying to defer to the lead agency to see what their recommendation is. I just want to make sure that we're following best practices. And that's my main concern is transparency, collaboration, and accountability. And so making sure that we're checking all those boxes.
Sarita, my question is this something that we have to vote on? I'm sorry, my camera's not working.
So this is the UCA agreement is not a funding stream that we or a contract that we administer like we do like our HUD grants and things like that, right? But we're seen as the governing body for all things homeless system wise in our community. So I think what our city and county folks would like to hear is if we have any recommendations, any concerns on how we keep, so we have the ability to influence what happens, right? And so us not taking a position means that we just kind of like we're not doing the function that we serve. We're not fulfilling our role, right? So it would be ideal for if there is feedback for us to be able to supply city and county government with that feedback.
And my last question to that is what have we done before? In the past? What have we done in the past with this process?
So there's been and Colin, you can correct me. How many years ago was it when we switched to the UCA? Was it 2 years?
No, it's been out since like 2020.
May of 2020, Colin.
Mm-hmm.
It was, yeah, implementation began at that point.
Is when it started, and that was that whole process was built with, and I wasn't here for a lot of the planning piece. I'd have to defer to Ricky, Malcolm, and I think Angela Holmes was here. Russ might have been here for some of that discussion and the planning of how the UCA came about. Colleen was here. Sally was here. There's a lot of people on here who were here that were part of it. I arrived to the city as it was going to contract.
Thank you.
But when it was executed in 2020, it followed the RFP process. Is that correct? So we've been
It did
doing
follow an RFP process, and the way it sort of all came about was because of an encampment that the that the state wanted to have removed. They removed it, and there needed to be an encampment response policy, and then that sort of turned into the encampment, the unsheltered coordinating agency that also dealt with the encampments, and that I don't know how much input policy and planning or HSAC had in talking through what work or what scopes would be included in the original RFPs.
and I can't remember. So I do see two hands. I see Russ and Eliza, and I don't know who was first.
Eliza was.
But I see
Eliza?
Russ shaking his head no. So before I move us to the next thing, Russ, did you want to share something else?
I mean, it wasn't what I was going to share, but just as a technical piece, the street outreach has been funded about 4 different ways over the last 2 decades in Durham. And the immediate predecessor in terms of funding was Alliance.
Right.
So the encampment thing was not tied to the UCA. It was not the driver for the UCA, but I understand where Colin's coming from with that, in that we had a month's notice from Alliance that they were ending funding for street outreach. And so the community went into a process of figuring out what the next steps would be. We gathered a lot of data. That was when the county stepped in to start providing funding, obviously the city too. And then there was a full RFP process at that time based on the city and county funding. There has unfortunately only been extensions the last couple of years, which means we've continued to fund like it's 2019. And you know that the numbers are 300% up since that point. So, I mean, that's been a bit of a disadvantage, but when it was built out, it included the encampment piece so that somebody other than the city would be handling parts of that, like alongside the different departments. But the encampment policy, I mean, I've been here 6 years. The encampment policy had been written, I think, just before I came.
That answer your question, Chair Ross?
Can I go ahead, Chair?
Go ahead.
On my end, my computer is freezing up a little bit, so I don't know if that's happening for you all as well.
No, we can hear you.
Okay. Just one quick question and one quick observation. The question is, have we gotten direction from elected officials that they want feedback on this?
I just know at this point, a formal decision has not been made as to what to do. I don't know how involved the elected officials are at this point. I think Keith is on here. Keith, if you want to weigh in, if you're not tied up with something else. I believe it's still kind of at a city manager, county manager, but I will have to defer to Keith. He'll have a better idea of where and who's looking for what.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Certainly at the level of the city manager's office, a proposal has come into this space. The city manager's office is not ready to make a recommendation yet. We find merit with the proposal, but we're most interested in a full vetting that includes this body and would like to be informed by it before we make a decision. Hopefully that'll be timely so that if the decision is made to go with the procurement process, there remains time to do so. But that we're not there yet. We'd like for the full vetting to go through as my understanding that the process should. Hope that's helpful and responsive.
Yeah, that's helpful. My next comment I think is related and hopefully will help understand why I asked that question. I think as a HSAC, we do have clear purview over certain things and unclear recommendations over other things. And so sometimes it can feel like as an HSAC member, we're missing clarity around where we're choosing to make a recommendation beyond our normal scope of work, and how that will be received versus when we're being asked to make a recommendation. And so I'm not sure how that looks in terms of process for our HSAC committee, but it can also cause this like jumping around effect in terms of focus. And so that's where I'm just thinking about like how do we manage that as a group, as an HSAC, and what does that look like in connection to the hopes of what we get engaged in more broadly? Because if it's everything, that does feel like it's expanding the scope of what's in our ICA contract, and that's okay. But I think we just have to think about capacity and those pieces as a body at this bigger level. So that was just my question. It wasn't clear to me, but that was really helpful to understand the connection points on this piece. Thanks.
That's a great question, Eliza. Go ahead, Russ.
Well, I want to go back to something Sharita said, and I'm going to say something I say in almost every meeting at this point, but you know, Sharita, I hear you saying you want us to all work together nicely, and you put it better than that. Again, the NyQuil's not fully worn off. And the way that works in groups best is a shared vision, a shared plan, and effective governance in order to, you know, keep us on that plan and move it forward. Because otherwise we do end up with these, like, so many side conversations, so many of these bits and pieces of frustration when people's individual projects don't get put forward. Like, there's a reason there's all this frustration there. So, I mean, again, just in this moment, we have to figure out, I guess, some response. But the bigger piece is we don't have a shared plan. If we want to have a say as HSAC, in a sense, of what happens with this city and county money, that's the place for it. Not every time an RFP comes out to get involved, because there's a lot of really compromising situations when we try and discuss these RFPs this way. There wouldn't be nearly as much if we were working on a full plan.
So are you speaking of the strategic plan?
Yeah.
Okay. So
yeah.
we that is a hope that we get there. But I think the challenge that we have is that we have real world, real time situations that are happening, right? And we have to figure out as a body what's the best way to manage that.
But Madam Chair, I'd push back on and just take this with a deep breath, because we've been on these meetings together for a long time. In the last 5 years, we've had 50 meetings, roughly. And we
I
still
know,
haven't
and
necessarily found time to work on, I mean, you and I both together in those pieces. And it's not that we have to find some way to get it, because otherwise we're going to get this. It's just going to continue, I feel like.
If I may, I can try and help shed some light on a little bit of this. Part of this goes back to Eliza, your question is sort of where does this fit in the scope of policy and planning and HSAC? This is where we are asking for an advisory role, not necessarily a formal recommendation, but to sort of hear thoughts and comments that can be taken into consideration as making an informed decision on which path to take. Historically, we have not brought these types of, let's talk about this type of RFP to HSAC or policy and planning, unless it's sort of like, hey, we're thinking about changing everything and want to hear your thoughts on it. We were planning to, the original goal of this RFP was to move forward with the scope of work that has historically been in there with minor modifications, clarification, cleaning up some of the more cumbersome reporting requirements that weren't necessarily beneficial to anything. However, given that a recommendation was made that city manager and other decision makers are looking at, we felt that it would be important to sort of come to policy and planning and hear the thoughts from the community, especially as there's organizations who may be interested in applying for these funds, and what to provide a full scope. If nobody wants to apply for funds, then, or we put out an RFP and nobody applies, then that's a different conversation that we have to sort of work through and make decisions on. So that was kind of where we were coming from, is trying to sort out and hear from policy and planning, because we are in a unique situation here where we would be essentially talking about pulling funding and funds and or services out of the nonprofit sector, moving it to a city department, and it just sort of, what would that look like? What are people's thoughts, and how do we move forward best, and how can the homeless team make the best recommendation if we're asked to do so for a final solution, and to ensure that we don't have a gap in services. Does that help?
that helps. So I do want to transition to the gallery. Before I do that, I would be remiss if I didn't take advantage of this opportunity just to share some of the concerns and questions that I have in doing this work, and how we influence that work and how we move forward. So I'm just gonna, like, I have these versus scenarios, and I'm gonna give you my list. So the lack of competition was on there, versus competition, opening up an RFP. Public safety versus homeless service provider. The fact that the proposed UCA recommended entity is also another body of the city government. And is there a conflict there? This ability to maybe not do UCA traditionally how it's been done, versus breaking some of the work up and being able to give certain tasks to certain bodies. And then policies and procedures and HUD guidelines and compliance and following that, versus putting our continuum in a position possibly to violate guidelines and standards. So, and the knowledge that needs to come with all of that part, because that's a huge part to all of this, is making sure we execute stuff in the way that the government is telling us we have to do those things. So those are just the things that that I have kind of struggled with when I think about kind of what has been recommended and what is being considered. And at this time, I guess if nobody from the committee has anything that they want to add, I will move to accepting comments from the gallery.
I think Drew had his hand raised.
I was just going to echo what you were saying, Shrita. Thank you, Ebony. I mean, I share those sentiments. I mean, I'll just say generally, I have a ton of professional and personal respect for community safety, for HART, for all the work that they're doing. I think the UCA in general needs to be revisited. I think the landscape of our community, as it's been pointed out since 2019, has changed dramatically. And we have a lovingly referred to army of outreach workers that are well trained and have a just deep presence in our community. And so I can understand the willingness to wanting to tap them to do some of that engagement work. I also have concerns that it would entirely live within that department. Shrita, many of the concerns that you echoed. Also, just given like our national landscape and federal landscape with homeless policy, wanting unsheltered work to live that closely to any type of public safety entity entirely, when there's a network of homeless providers already doing that work, I think that's worth having a broad community-wide conversation about. And then I would also just echo concerns I said similarly about the process and leading up to this point. It feels like that's something that we haven't done before, which gives me some pause.
Anybody else from the committee? All right, we're open to the gallery. Anybody have any things they want to contribute to this discussion? I'm looking for hands. Eliza, is your hand up?
Yes.
Go for
Technically,
it.
I'm gallery. I'm sorry, y'all. I spoke earlier. As we're sharing more, I'm just thinking about the landscape beyond homelessness, like what is happening for the city and county in this moment, in terms of thinking about funding broadly, and funding that may not be coming anymore. And so I just want to lift that up in terms of, it feels like we're living in the zone of funding stays within the homeless services at a certain level. And I think when you look at the landscape broadly, folks are having to make really hard decisions about where funding goes when we don't have funding. And so I guess what I'm trying to point out is, like, if we're operating currently with some duplication of services, there can be more imagination about what things look like that doesn't equal money, like money moving from one entity to another. Could also look like replacement of funds because we have less funds at the local level. It could also look like what is happening now is something that gets absorbed by another entity and then allows for something else to happen. So I think like some of the conversations we're having are really important and also really scoped into what's happening specifically in the homeless space. And that's important. And at the same time, there's a lot more happening if we like open up our view a little bit further. And I think that that is important and helpful to talk about as a part of this work, because those are the hard conversations that we're going to have within the homeless space, one way or the other. Hopefully that made sense.
I will share the goal in this RFP was to hopefully increase the dollar amount. City and county, we're working on increasing the dollar value from 430,000 to 500,000. I know it's not a huge jump. However, we're working within dedicated housing funds, which is a limited dollar amount. And part of the budget request that the HSAC made to city council was for an additional $300,000 for street outreach. So that would take street outreach of 300,000 plus, let's assume we had a full 500 this year instead of 430, you'd be between 730 and $800,000 for unsheltered coordinating agency street outreach if all those fundings were awarded. So just want to put that on the table that you're close to $800,000 a year if all of those pieces come together.
I'll just jump in for a point of clarification. The UCA work itself, as I understand, has multiple aspects. So there's pre-case management engagement services, and then there's case management engagement. I guess as a point of clarification, there's an opportunity for partnership where you could tap HART to say, you all are already doing this engagement work. We want to make sure that we're not duplicating services, and then to have another agency or organization be providing that case management support. Am I correct in understanding that?
Yes, there's a couple pieces of the puzzle in UCA. You're correct.
But it's also, truth be told, part of that design was simply, in the original design, a way for case managers that were already working with people that were unsheltered to follow them through the shelter, because there were concerns about the case management capacity at the shelter at the time. So it's written in a way that it sounds like it's two very different things, but it was written to cover that until things could get to a different place within the shelter. So the engagement and following people through is very much overlapping with a lot of how HART is engaging in terms of their, they have that, if Ryan can correct me or Abena can correct me, but, if they touch somebody, so just have a touch point with somebody, they can stay with them for 30 days to connect them. Every time they somebody calls out for them, that 30 days renews. And so it's functioning very much like those two things put together.
Sally?
I just had a few clarifying questions. So on the UCA scope of work, did you say, Colin, that you and Samantha had revised that scope of work at all for the new RFA that was scheduled to come out? Or it was the same scope of work, which I think Drew mentioned the pre-case management, case management, and then there was the encampment and the coordinated response.
I don't want to get into the details of what may or may not be in there, but we had talked about keeping it focused on unsheltered and making sure that there would be a warm handoff to shelters or other case managers. That the UCA contract should not necessarily have a case manager following people through the entire system forever and ever, because then you end up having a caseload of people who are housed, which then makes it very difficult to provide street outreach services if you've got staff tied up with a large number of people who are currently in permanent housing.
And then did you say that you had, I know you had requested additional street outreach dollars. Did you say that you've already put that into the RFP, or that would be added later if the June budget is approved?
If the June budget is approved, we'll have to figure out how that $300,000 would work. It may have to be a separate contract. I don't have an answer of how that would work yet. I'd have to talk to legal and purchasing and figure out how that would work. And it may depend on how the first RFP is finally written.
Okay. And I guess I'm wondering, so it seems like you were, so it seems like as other people have said, the RFP was written in 2019, where pre-COVID, pre-high numbers of unshelteredness, pre-HART, and it sounded like that you all saw the value in keeping the scope of work as written. And I guess I'm wondering if it seemed like you weren't revisiting the scope of work a month ago, I guess I'm curious why it's now being revisited.
The scope of work has changed a little bit, given what we know is we've got more people unsheltered, and street outreach street outreach in theory should be doing street outreach, right? And not necessarily doing long-term permanent housing case management. So that would be like a scope of work change. We're not talking about a radical shift to the scope of work. At this point in time, we weren't planning to do a radical shift. We're having this conversation as it was a recommendation for HART to bring this on, which is a different path than we had originally anticipated. And as Keith had shared, this is taking the full vetting process and hearing from policy and planning that before a decision was made to move forward, awarding this all to HART, that we needed to go through the vetting process and hear from the community. That's why it's sort of coming back to the table now.
And when Keith said that a proposal had been submitted, I guess I'm unclear what that proposal is. Has somebody, I know that Russ had made a recommendation at an HSAC meeting, but has a formal proposal been submitted to the city?
I'll defer to Keith on that. I'm not
Well,
sure.
I hope I'm not responding out of turn. This is about my second meeting on all this. And to the extent that I may be involved a bit more in the future, I've got pockets of confusion with all this, but I will catch up. I've been around. But notwithstanding, what has been received in our office is news that the current contractor for this service no longer wishes to continue in that space. And so one of the things we have to unpack is what precisely does that mean? But a part of that resignation, if you will, or part of that proposed transition was a fairly specific recommendation of an entity to then do it. And so what we're seeking is clarity around what that specific recommendation is. If there is some uniformity of thought around that specificity, if I'm assuming that specificity exists, or what is it that this body would like to see, given the fact that somebody wants to walk away from it? The recommendation minimally suggests to us that the city has an entity that there may be some interest from this body to have a role to assume in the space of somebody not wanting to continue in the role that they have. So it's in that space we're occupying the term vetting, which I think we need to do with some rapidity. I'm hearing concerns relative to long-term strategies and a variety of those kinds of things. But I hope underneath all of that, that one, a transition like this would foment continuity of the service, even as we need to make strategic adjustments if that's being called for. Nothing wrong with painting the train while it's rolling, because I think given the urgency of the service that this represents, that something of that crude analogy may be necessary. And so understanding that, and this is locally funded, not federally funded, we have a variety of options to consider in that space, but would like to do so in an informed fashion.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. What's that?
I thought you still had a question. That's all.
Oh, no, I mean, that's very helpful. I mean, I guess I can, see a reason for, conversation about, given the work that HART is doing, how to, what not sure how that they play an important role in outreach and engagement with people who are homeless, at the same time that I, sort of see a need to think carefully about those roles and the specific tasks of street outreach, and thinking more about sort of a division of responsibilities. I mean, I think that if that's something that I've brought up for a couple of months, so definitely something that I'm interested in, but I guess I wouldn't, support sort of, wholesale, a change at this point.
Russ, your hand is up, but I got a question for you. based on this slide. So this is my question, and this might be I don't know. It might not be an easy one for you to respond to.
Yeah.
Tell us about Housing for New Hope's street outreach experience in the last year.
Say what?
Tell us about Housing for New Hope's street outreach experience over the last year. Like because there was a decision made that you were not going to continue. So I just want to hear a little bit about the challenges, the things that led you to determine that this was no longer something you could do. So can you kind of paint a picture?
And let me bring a different nonprofit, non-government perspective. It's not something we can't do. It's not necessarily something we don't want to do. And no, I'm not saying anything bad, but I'm just saying this is an important piece. Sometimes as an organization, you have to reflect on what the greatest needs are and where you can make the greatest contribution. And I'm going to kind of give you another version, basically, of what I said that day, because it was, as sometimes people say, from the heart, but it was also the truth. We realize that supportive housing is the place we can have the biggest impact. It's also one of the most technically hard things to do. Half the churches I run into are like, we're going to do street outreach. None of them get excited and like, hey, we're going to do supportive housing. There's a reason, because it's such hard work. And so we really have been reflecting on that's a place where we're most needed, and not even just in this jurisdiction. So that's one piece. We also have had various conversations around, I mean, I share the numbers. The team, even when it's been hard to stay fully staffed at times, they've had great outcomes. I mean, 60% of the folks that agreed to engage with them moved to some version of, permanent, I mean, not permanent housing, but a positive housing outcome. So not intense. And tents have their place, don't mishear me, but not intense and not on the sidewalk and not on a bench. And so we were in lots of different conversations. Drew approached me last fall wanting to look at ways to think through this UCA piece. And what I heard Drew clearly saying was that they want to really lean in to, the work they're doing, what I would probably term street inreach, in terms of providing very necessary services to unsheltered folks in a set location. I fully support that at some point we do need some kind of day center, and I've seen a lot of energy out of Drew and out of Open Table in that direction over the last several months, and I'm looking forward to us finding some way for that to happen. That's why, truth be told, when the ARPA piece came out, we made the approach to partner, because we felt like that was an appropriate piece, and that just wasn't where things ended up going, and we understand that, but we saw that that was really the place they were leaning into. But I've also seen how much this heart team has grown, and they are out interacting. Do I have questions and concerns about some of it? Yes, and Ryan fully knows that. The things I said that day are true. They got to get an HMIS. Every interaction has to be recorded, because we have had experiences of heart team members interacting with people for a while and not knowing that they're already interacting with our team. That's unnecessarily duplication. But I think the biggest piece where, which I think is really important, is I'm pretty serious that there needs to be some kind of advisory board. I appreciate the transparency that comes from Heart, but I think that the extra level of accountability around this is important, because it's an area of growth. There are some differences between public safety and homeless services, and Sharita, you've talked to that point. I would love to see it like a small advisory board that had some people from very much from the medical side, from the behavioral health side, from some downtown folks that can really help build on the good work they're already doing. They're already out there. They already relate to people really well. Like it's perfect. I mean, like I'm always amazed at the relationships they build. So how do we like build on it to make sure it's focused on housing? That's my biggest piece. And so having kind of like scanned the landscape, taking at face value what other partners were telling me, and also realizing the timing was fairly short, it just seemed like a really efficient thing to think about. Like, how could you enhance this already large team that's already out there, already engaging with all these folks, versus trying to stand up something? So that's my, I don't know, Sherita, if that answers it for you. We didn't take it lightly. I never closed down anything lightly or transition anything lightly. It really was our own kind of vision for where we feel like we need to go, but also just what I kept being told by partners and others about where they felt like they wanted to lean in and make the greatest contribution. And I think as we move toward a plan, we'll all know more and more the pieces we're all going to need to lean into more and grow into and grow our capacity to best serve our most vulnerable neighbors.
Can I respond to that, Russ, if that's okay? Yeah, I 100% agree that I think there needs to be some collaboration as a part of the UCA. So I know, and I'll just speak on behalf of Open Table Ministry. And if that means I need to abstain from any recommendation that comes forward, like that's fine. I'd be very clear that we would be interested in terms of applying for a competitive application process. So I just want to be very clear that there's at least one provider that is willing to submit an application for aspects of the UCA work. As Russ mentioned, I approached Housing for New Hope back in the fall, asking how we could explore that partnership. And I still believe it needs to be a collaborative partnership in order to be most effective, outside of a strategic plan, of course, but what can we do in the interim? So as Russ put it well, doing street outreach inreach, getting a little mixed up there, but more than willing and excited about doing case management that's actively out in the community, engaging with folks outside the walls of our building. And again, continuing to tap into the resource and leveraging the resource that is HEART and their outreach teams. And again, that would be taking stock of what I understand HEART's role as a first response and not as a homeless service provider, seeing ways that we can bring those two entities together. So I just wanted to respond to that point. And again, I'm happy to abstain in any recommendation moving forward, but I just wanted to be clear where our organization stands. And I know that's a different hat outside of being a member of policy and planning.
Thank you, Russ, and thank you, Drew. I think some things I heard was capacity in both of you guys' response. I would be interested, Russ, in knowing like how long street outreach encounter, like on average, one individual, what that process looked like, how long did it take to get that person to the positive housing determination. And then my other question is if HEART was to get the UCA contract, is the city ready to be into what the expectations of a UCA entity it would require them to do, like especially in light of maybe Russ, you being able to shed some light on how long outreach to people took. And so just kind of wondering about that.
I mean, I'd have to ask the team for more details. I mean, we always hear the stories of folks that we interact with for a year before they ever really talk to us. So I'd have to get that data back from the team. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. It would be great to see it. Just for
I'll see if I
can.
I'll see if I can pull some data real quick from HMIS.
And so, that last question is what it like. Has the city looked at what would be required of the UCA entity if it's placed within the structure of the way HEART works and operates? I don't know. That might be a Ryan question.
Everybody. So Colin and I are working to meet to talk about this more. I will say that I know that the question of HMIS has been brought up and that we are moving our familiar neighbors into collecting data on HMIS starting next week and have been working on that for some months. So for that concern, it won't be an issue. And for the other aspects of it, in terms of like length of staying with someone, we're prepared to stay with someone as long as it takes. We have a familiar neighbors program now that has worked with people over a year. So I think that we are prepared to do the work, but we're also looking, listening to this conversation and ultimately waiting for guidance and direction from the city manager. Thank you.
We have, oh, we're at time. Do we have any other insights, concerns, or any of those things? Colin, I don't know if we got to.
I think Sally has her hand up.
Who?
Sally has her hand up. I don't know if that's
Sally. I'm sorry, I can't see your hand right now.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I guess I'm just not, I guess I'm just still not hearing a clear reason why Heart can't continue the excellent work that it's doing while partnering with homeless service agencies. I don't know. That's all.
So I do know I want to be mindful of people's time. We've heard from Colin, we've heard from the gentleman who's here from the city. What is his name? I need to write your name down.
Keith.
Keith. I don't know. Does the body have any recommendation at this point? Colin, do you need something now, right? If we're going to make
We don't necessarily need a formal recommendation. I wanted to hear people's thoughts, and I think we've heard everybody's thoughts, that we can sort of take these thoughts, and there's some common themes that have come through, and be able to incorporate those into help with the vetting and process with the city manager's office and with the county as decisions are being made. I mean, I don't know that there is a formal decision that needs to be made. If you think there's a formal recommendation you would like to make, Madam Chair, you're welcome to make a formal recommendation to move one way or another. It doesn't mean that the city and county can do as they wish. It's making sure that we collect the information that we hear and hear the thoughts of the Policy and Planning Committee as the HSAC, because you are an advisory board to help advise and provide information and insight into things that we don't necessarily see on a day-to-day basis because of the different lenses and the different chairs we all sit in.
Rita, I know you can't see hands, but Eliza has her hand raised.
Eliza.
Thanks. Just curious, as maybe offering up a potential helpful next step. I am confused because I used to hear there's overlap between the UCA and Heart. And now I'm hearing there are pieces that are not overlap, and that's helpful. So it feels like a helpful next step could be, in the way that the contract is written currently, can we suss out where there's duplication across the way that Heart works and where there's not, to help understand what are the pieces potential of connection between providers and Heart? Because when this contract started, Heart was not in play. And I think that might offer some clarity. And I'm confused because before this change from Housing for New Hope, I heard from several folks that they felt like there was duplication. So I think if we could, instead of just saying it's one big thing, how do we separate the pieces and get clear about the duplication? And I think that could be really helpful for conversations in this group, but also just an understanding where are we maybe not spending money efficiently, and how do we think better about that moving forward? I think that could be really helpful to not just HSAC, but also managers and elected officials making those decisions.
Thank you, Eliza.
I will share just Hart and Drew, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding Hart has been doing, some of this work, but they are not necessarily funded to do this type of work. So even if they did this type of work, it's not like it would free up all of this money to go other places. There may have to be some money going to Hart to be able to take this on. And I don't know the answer to that, but it's not necessarily like if Hart does this, all of a sudden we're going to have a whole bunch of extra money in the homeless system. There could be, and there might not. I'm just being honest, like, because that's not, they're set up as a community safety organization, and that's part of the whole vetting process. Just being transparent. Don't want people to think one thing and it not be accurate. So I'm happy to defer to others who know more about the budget than I do.
I think at this point, I think, Colin, that you could share, I think the common, things of this conversation. And if you want to, pull people's quotes directly from this meeting in some kind of document that you supply to city and county government, I think that would be like the fair way, so that they can decide, make the decision. And I think like that's the limits, because I don't know if we can come to a consensus on what is to be done, or how we break up the UCA, or any of those things, if that's a possibility, or rewriting or revamping what that looks like. I think just kind of sharing the comments that were here, I sit at the HSAC table, but I sit as a provider that provides services to probably everybody y'all serve outside of the continuum. So in many instances, I know tons of these people and are eager to serve and help them, and probably already doing things to help them in several ways, and just not knowing who they're working with because I'm outside of the system. So, I'm for what's best with the system, and I just want to make sure I'm informed so that I know how to, when I take off the HSAC hat, I know how to, as the social worker, navigate the system and make sure I get people connected to the services and the resources that they need. I think we've had a very good conversation. Colin, you have what you need, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And we will hear back on whatever the next steps are, right?
Yes, ma'am.
We have reached the end of our meeting. Thank you guys for staying over the 8 minutes. I will entertain a motion to adjourn our meeting.
Very
I'll make a
productive
motion
meeting.
to
I make
adjourn.
a motion.
People talking at the same time. Who was that? Helen and Ebony?
And Angela Holmes.
Okay. Oh, Angela and Ebony. Okay. We have a motion. Our meeting is adjourned. I will see you the second Monday in April. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.